The piercing wail of sirens cut through Denver's quiet suburban night like a knife through silk. Officer Jake Martinez gripped his steering wheel tighter as the emergency dispatcher's voice crackled through his radio with an urgency that made his blood run cold. All units, domestic violence in progress at 1247 Maple Street. Possible homicide attempt. Suspect still on scene. Child involved. Martinez had been patrolling these tree-lined neighborhoods for 8 years, responding to countless calls that ranged from minor disputes to major crimes. But something about this particular call sent ice through his veins. Maybe it was the dispatcher's tone, unusually strained and tense, or perhaps it was the mention of a child. As a father of 2 young daughters himself, Martinez knew that domestic violence cases involving children were always the worst kind of nightmare. Racing through the snowy February streets at 11:47 p.m., Martinez's patrol car skidded slightly as he took the corner onto Maple Street. The scene that greeted him was chaos incarnate. 3 police vehicles had already arrived, their red and blue lights painting the modest 2-story colonial house in alternating colors of emergency. Neighbors stood on their porches, despite the freezing temperature, some clutching robes tightly around themselves, others holding their own children close as they witnessed the destruction of what had once been their quiet, safe neighborhood. Martinez's partner, Officer Sarah Kim, met him at the front door, her usually composed face pale with shock. "Jake, this is bad," she said, her voice barely steady. "Really bad. The suspect is Robert Morrison, 34 years old. He's already in custody. But Jake..." She paused, swallowing hard. "The victim is his wife Lisa, and there's a little girl upstairs. She's only 3 years old." Stepping through the front door felt like entering a war zone. The living room was completely destroyed, furniture overturned, family photos scattered across the hardwood floor with their glass frames, shattered into dangerous fragments. A child's toys were strewn everywhere, colorful building blocks, a small pink bicycle lying on its side, and a stuffed elephant that had somehow ended up hanging from the ceiling fan. But it was the kitchen that told the real story of terror. Blood. There was so much blood. Dark red stains splattered the white. Kitchen walls like abstract art painted by violence itself. Cabinet doors hung open, their contents spilled across the tile floor. A wooden chair lay broken in pieces near the kitchen table, and more blood pooled beneath it, already beginning to darken and coagulate. Lisa Morrison, 29 years old according to her driver's license, lay unconscious on the cold tile floor. Paramedics worked frantically over her broken body, their hands moving with practiced efficiency as they fought to save her life. Multiple skull fractures, possible internal bleeding. One paramedic called out to his partner, "We need to get her to Denver General immediately. She's lost a lot of blood." Martinez watched as they carefully lifted Lisa onto a stretcher, her face so swollen and bruised that she was barely recognizable as human. Her left arm bent at an unnatural angle, and dark bruises covered every visible inch of her skin. This wasn't just domestic violence. This was attempted murder, pure and simple. Outside, Robert Morrison sat in the back of a police cruiser, his hands cuffed behind his back. Even from a distance, Martinez could see that the man was massive. Easily 6 feet 4 inches tall, with the muscled build of someone who worked construction for a living. His knuckles were split and bloody, his white t-shirt stained crimson. But what chilled Martinez to the bone was Morrison's demeanor. He wasn't crying or showing any remorse. Instead, he was screaming obscenities at every officer who passed by. His face twisted with rage rather than regret. "She deserved it," Morrison bellowed as Martinez walked past. "That worthless woman deserved every bit of it. And if she lives, I'll finish what I started." Martinez fought every instinct to respond to the man's vicious words. Instead, he focused on what mattered most, finding the child. "Where's the little girl?" he asked Officer Kim. "Upstairs. We heard crying when we first arrived, but now ... Kim's voice trailed off ominously. "Now it's completely quiet up there, Jake. Too quiet." Together, they climbed the narrow staircase, their footsteps muffled by the carpeted steps. The second-floor hallway was dark, except for the light spilling from one bedroom doorway. As they approached, Martinez could make out a child's room decorated, with princess wallpaper and stuffed animals. But there was no sign of the little girl. Then they heard it, the faintest whimpering sound, so quiet it was almost lost beneath the commotion from downstairs. The sound was coming from inside the bedroom closet. Martinez knelt beside the closed closet door, his heart breaking as he realized what he was about to find. "Sweetheart," he called softly. "My name is Jake, and I'm a police officer. I'm here to help you, okay?" The whimpering stopped completely. Officer Kim positioned herself on the other side of the closet door as Martinez slowly turned the handle. Inside, curled into the smallest possible ball in the far corner beneath hanging dresses and coats, was 3-year-old Emma Morrison. The sight would haunt Martinez for the rest of his career. Emma was wearing pink Disney princess pajamas that were now stained with her mother's blood, evidence of how close she had been to the violence. Her tiny body was trembling uncontrollably, her enormous brown eyes wide with terror as she clutched a small stuffed elephant against her chest like it was her only lifeline to safety. Her blonde hair was matted with blood, and small scratches covered her arms where she had crawled across the broken glass downstairs before hiding. But it was her silence that was most disturbing. Martinez had 2 daughters of his own, and he knew that 3-year-olds were typically chatty, curious, and full of questions. Emma Morrison made no sound at all, except for that occasional whimper. She stared at the officers with the hollow expression of someone who had witnessed horrors that no child should ever see. "Hi there, sweetheart," Martinez whispered, extending his hand very slowly. "You're safe now. Nobody is going to hurt you anymore." Emma didn't respond. She didn't nod, didn't shake her head, didn't make any acknowledgement that she had even heard him speak. She simply stared, her small body continuing to shake with trauma and cold. As Martinez carefully lifted Emma from the closet, she felt impossibly. Ligic didn't resist. She simply remained completely, utterly silent. That silence would last for weeks, and it would nearly let a monster go free. Dr. Sarah Chun had encountered every form of childhood trauma imaginable during her 20-year career as Denver's leading child psychologist, but nothing had prepared her for the haunting silence of Emma Morrison. 3 days had passed since that horrific night on Maple Street, and the little girl hadn't spoken a single word to anyone. Not to her grandmother, who now had emergency custody. Not to the nurses at Denver General Hospital, where she'd been examined, and certainly not to Dr. Chun during their first meeting at the Children's Advocacy Center. The Advocacy Center was designed specifically to be a safe haven for traumatized children. Soft pastel walls were decorated with cheerful cartoon characters. Comfortable couches created cozy conversation areas, and shelves overflowed with toys. Games and art supplies meant to encourage young victims to express their experiences in whatever way felt natural. But Emma Morrison sat in the center of this carefully crafted environment, as if she were completely alone in the universe. Dr. Chun watched from behind a 2-way mirror as Emma occupied the same chair she'd chosen during their first session 48 hours earlier. The child's positioning was telling. She sat with her back against the wall, facing the door, her small body coiled like a spring, ready to flee at the first sign of danger. Her legs dangled from the oversized chair, not quite reaching the floor, and her hands remained clasped tightly in her lap. Most disturbing of all were her eyes, enormous brown orbs that seemed to hold a lifetime of fear despite belonging to someone who had lived barely 3 years. "Has she eaten anything today?" Dr. Chun asked Margaret Walsh, Emma's 62-year-old grandmother, who sat in the observation room, looking 10 years older than she had just a week ago. Margaret shook her silver head wearily. "A few crackers this morning, maybe half a banana. She won't touch anything else. She just ... stares, even. When I try to read her favorite books or put on her cartoons, she doesn't respond. It's like my granddaughter disappeared that night and left behind this terrified little ghost." The older woman's voice cracked with emotion. Margaret had raised 4 children of her own and helped raise Emma since birth, when Lisa, her daughter, had needed extra support as a young single mother. She'd watched Emma grow from a babbling infant into a chatty, curious toddler who asked endless questions about everything from why the sky was blue to where butterflies went when it rained. This silent, withdrawn child bore little resemblance to the vibrant little girl who had filled Margaret's house with laughter just days before. Through the observation window, Dr. Chun studied Emma's body language with the trained eye of someone who specialized in reading the unspoken communication of traumatized children. Emma's shoulders were permanently hunched, as if she were trying to make herself as small as possible. Her breathing was shallow and quick, indicating a state of constant hypervigilance. Most concerning was the way she startled at every sound: footsteps in the hallway, the gentle hum of the heating system, even the soft rustle of paper when Dr. Chun had taken notes during their previous sessions. "The preliminary hearing is scheduled for next week," Dr. Chun said quietly to Margaret. "District Attorney Rodriguez needs to know if Emma will be able to testify. Without her testimony, that monster goes free," Margaret finished, her voice hardening. "Lisa is still in intensive care. The doctors say she'll live, thank God, but she has no memory of that night. The head trauma caused significant memory loss. Emma is the only witness to what Robert did." Dr. Chun nodded grimly. She'd consulted on dozens of domestic violence cases over the years, and she understood the legal reality all too well. Physical evidence could prove that Lisa Morrison had been brutally beaten, but proving that Robert Morrison was the one who beat her required witness testimony. A 3-year-old child who refused to speak represented not just a therapeutic challenge, but a potential miscarriage of justice. Returning to the therapy room, Dr. Chun tried a different approach. Instead of sitting across from Emma in her usual chair, she lowered herself to the floor and began arranging colorful building blocks in simple patterns. The technique, called parallel play, was designed to create a non-threatening environment where children could observe adult behavior without feeling pressured to participate. "I'm going to build a tower," Dr. Chun said in a gentle, conversational tone, not looking directly at Emma. "I like to stack the red blocks first, then the blue ones. What color do you think should go next?" Emma's gaze flickered toward the blocks for just a moment before returning to her fixed stare at the door. It was the first sign of interest she'd shown in anything since arriving at the center, but she made no move to participate. Dr. Chun continued building, narrating her actions in soothing tones. "Sometimes when I'm scared, I like to build things. It makes me feel like I have control over something, even if it's just these little blocks. Do you ever feel scared, Emma?" The question hung in the air unanswered, but Dr. Chun noticed something subtle yet significant. Emma's breathing pattern changed slightly when the word scared was mentioned. It was a micro-response, but it indicated that the child was processing what she heard, even if she couldn't or wouldn't respond verbally. After an hour of patient parallel play, Dr. Chun had made minimal progress. Emma had glanced at the blocks several more times, and once, when Dr. Chun had accidentally knocked over her tower, Emma's eyes had widened slightly, perhaps with surprise, or maybe even the faintest hint of amusement. But still no words, no gestures, no clear communication of any kind. Margaret collected Emma at the end of the session, lifting her granddaughter with the careful tenderness of someone handling precious, broken china. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Chun knelt to Emma's eye level one final time. "Emma, I know you have important things to tell me when you're ready," she said softly. "I'll be here whenever you want to talk, okay? There's no rush. We have all the time in the world." But even as she spoke those reassuring words, Dr. Chun knew they were a lie. Time was the one thing they didn't have. In just 5 days, the preliminary hearing would determine whether Robert Morrison would be released on bail or held pending trial. If Emma couldn't find her voice by then, a dangerous man might walk free, and a little girl's silence would become his freedom. Later that evening, Dr. Chun sat in her home office, reviewing Emma's case file and feeling the weight of professional frustration. She'd tried every traditional approach: play therapy, art therapy, even music therapy, but Emma remained locked inside her trauma like a prisoner in a soundproof cell. Standard therapeutic interventions weren't working, and time was running out. That's when her phone rang with a call that would change everything. On the line was Officer Tom Bradley from the Denver Police Department's K-9 unit, and he had an unusual suggestion that just might hold the key to unlocking Emma's silence. Officer Tom Bradley had been partnered with Rex, a 4-year-old German Shepherd, for 3 years, but their bond went far deeper than the typical handler-dog relationship. Rex wasn't just any police K-9. He was a dual-certified dog-trained in both traditional police work and specialized victim services, making him one of only 12 such animals in the entire state of Colorado. While most police dogs were trained for drug detection, explosive detection, or apprehension work, Rex had received additional training in what experts called therapeutic intervention, the ability to provide comfort and support to trauma victims, particularly children. The phone call that would change everything came at 7:23 p.m. on a Thursday evening. Bradley was at home in his modest ranch house on Denver's outskirts, watching Rex play in the backyard with his own 2 young sons, when his cell phone rang. The caller ID showed Dr. Sarah Chun's number from the Children's Advocacy Center, and Bradley knew immediately that this wasn't a social call. "Tom, I need your help," Dr. Chun said without preamble, her usually calm voice tinged with desperation. "I have a 3-year-old girl who witnessed her father nearly kill her mother, and she hasn't spoken a word in 5 days. We're running out of time. The preliminary hearing is Monday, and if she can't testify, the perpetrator walks," Bradley finished, understanding the implications immediately. He'd worked dozens of domestic violence cases where the victim's testimony was crucial for prosecution. "What's the child's name?" "Emma Morrison. She's completely withdrawn, won't respond to any traditional therapy approaches. I've tried everything, Tom. Play therapy, art therapy, music therapy. Nothing is getting through to her. She just sits there staring at the door, like she's expecting her father to burst in and finish what he started." Bradley watched Rex through the kitchen window as the conversation continued. The German Shepherd was gently playing tug-of-war with 7-year-old Michael Bradley, carefully moderating his strength so the child could win occasionally. Rex had an almost supernatural ability to read human emotions and adjust his behavior accordingly, a trait that had made him invaluable in victim services work. "Tell me about Rex's success with trauma victims," Dr. Chun continued. "I've heard stories, but I need to know specifics. Has he ever worked with someone this young?" Bradley leaned against his kitchen counter, mentally reviewing Rex's case history. His youngest victim was a 5-year-old boy who witnessed a gang shooting. The kid hadn't spoken in 2 weeks, was having severe nightmares, wouldn't let anyone touch him. Rex spent 3 hours with him over 2 sessions, and by the end, the boy was not only talking, but providing detailed descriptions that helped us arrest the shooters. The officer paused, remembering other cases. There was also Maria Santos, a teenager who was assaulted in City Park. She was so traumatized, she couldn't even make eye contact with human beings. But something about Rex's presence calmed her. Dogs don't judge, don't ask questions, don't have expectations. They just exist in the moment, with pure acceptance. Dr. Chun was quiet for a moment, processing this information. What makes Rex different from other therapy animals? I've worked with therapy dogs before, and while they're helpful, they've never produced the dramatic breakthroughs you're describing. Rex is different because he's specifically trained to recognize trauma responses, Bradley explained, warming to a subject he was passionate about. Most therapy dogs provide general comfort, but Rex has been taught to identify specific signs of distress and respond appropriately. He knows the difference between fear-based withdrawal and depression-based withdrawal. He can sense when someone is having a flashback versus when they're simply sad. And most importantly, he's trained to create what we call safe connection. He approaches trauma victims in ways that don't trigger their fight or flight responses. Through the window, Bradley watched Rex demonstrate this very ability. His youngest son, 4-year-old Danny, had fallen and scraped his knee on the concrete patio. Instead of bounding over excitedly as most dogs would, Rex approached slowly, lowering his body posture to appear less threatening. The dog sat quietly beside the crying child, not trying to lick or jump on him, simply providing calm, steady presence until Danny's tears subsided, and he wrapped his small arms around Rex's neck. There's something else, Bradley added thoughtfully. Rex seems to understand when children need him to be brave for them. I've watched him work with kids who are too scared to speak to adults, but they'd whisper their secrets to Rex like he was some kind of furry confessor. It's like he gives them permission to feel safe again. Dr. Chun's voice carried new hope when she spoke again. Would you be willing to bring Rex to meet Emma? I know it's unconventional, and there are protocols we'd need to follow, but when? Bradley interrupted. He was already mentally rearranging his schedule. Tomorrow afternoon? I can arrange for Emma's grandmother to be present, and we'll use the center's most comfortable therapy room. I'm afraid this is our last chance, Tom. If traditional therapy won't work, and if Emma can't find her voice, Robert Morrison is going to be released on bail pending trial. A man who nearly killed his wife in front of his toddler daughter will be walking free. Bradley felt the familiar surge of determination that came with challenging cases. In his 15 years in law enforcement, he'd seen too many victims silenced by fear, too many perpetrators escape justice on technicalities. But he'd also witnessed the remarkable healing power of the human-animal bond, particularly in cases involving children. We'll be there, he said firmly. But Dr. Chun, I need you to understand something important. Rex isn't magic. He's highly trained and incredibly intuitive, but he can't force healing. He can only create the conditions where healing becomes possible. The breakthrough has to come from Emma herself. As Bradley hung up the phone, he walked outside to where Rex was now lying peacefully in the grass. Both boys curled against his warm fur as they watched the sunset paint the Colorado sky in shades of pink and gold. The dog's ears perked up as his handler approached, and his intelligent brown eyes seemed to ask what new challenge awaited them. Tomorrow we meet a little girl who really needs us, boy, Bradley said softly, kneeling to scratch behind Rex's ears. She's locked inside her fear, and we need to help her find the key to get out. Rex's tail thumped once against the ground, not with excitement, but with what Bradley had learned to recognize as understanding. Somehow, this remarkable dog seemed to comprehend that tomorrow would bring one of their most important missions yet. The preliminary hearing was just 4 days away. The Children's Advocacy Center felt different on Friday afternoon, charged with an almost electric sense of anticipation that even the building's familiar cheerful atmosphere couldn't mask. Dr. Sarah. Chun had arrived early to prepare the therapy room, rearranging furniture to create the most welcoming environment possible for what might be Emma Morrison's last chance at finding her voice before Monday's preliminary hearing. Margaret Walsh sat in the waiting area, nervously smoothing the fabric of her granddaughter's favorite yellow dress, the one with tiny sunflowers that Emma had insisted on wearing every day before the tragedy. Today was the first time since that horrible night that Emma had shown any interest in her appearance, pointing to the dress when Margaret had offered clothing choices that morning. It was a microscopic sign of progress, but Margaret clung to it like a lifeline. She slept through the night for the first time yesterday, Margaret told Dr. Chun as they waited for Officer Bradley and Rex to arrive. No nightmares, no screaming. She even ate half a piece of toast this morning without me having to coax her. I don't know if it means anything, but every small step matters, Dr. Chun assured her, though privately she wondered if Emma's sudden calm might actually indicate deeper withdrawal rather than improvement. Sometimes severely traumatized children experienced periods of eerie peace just before complete emotional shutdown. At exactly 2 p.m., the center's front door chimed, and Officer Tom Bradley entered with Rex at his side. The German shepherd moved with the confident grace of a working dog, his dark coat gleaming under the fluorescent lights, but there was something gentler about his demeanor than typical police canine self. His ears were alert, but not aggressive. His tail held in a neutral position that suggested calm awareness rather than high excitement. Dr. Chun had worked with therapy animals before, but Rex was immediately different from any dog she'd encountered. Most therapy dogs were golden retrievers or Labradors, breeds selected for their naturally gentle, people-pleasing temperaments. Rex was a working German shepherd, bred for intelligence and intensity, yet he carried himself with an almost meditative serenity that was both impressive and slightly mysterious. "How do you want to handle the introduction?" Bradley asked, keeping his voice low despite being in a different room from Emma. Rex's ears swiveled toward the therapy room door, and Dr. Chun noticed the dog's nostrils flaring slightly as he processed scents and sounds that humans couldn't detect. "Let's start very slowly," Dr. Chun replied. "Emma is hypervigilant about her environment. Any sudden movements or loud sounds trigger immediate panic responses. She's been sitting in the same chair, facing the door, for the past hour." Bradley nodded, understanding the implications. In his work with trauma victims, he'd learned that successful interventions required reading subtle cues and responding appropriately. Rex had already begun his assessment, his intelligent eyes focused on the therapy room door, as if he could sense the frightened child beyond it. "Rex, easy," Bradley murmured, and the dog immediately shifted into what the officer recognized as his therapeutic mode. Body posture lowered slightly, movements deliberate and non-threatening. Every aspect of his behavior calibrated to project calm safety rather than working dog intensity. Dr. Chun opened the therapy room door slowly, and the 4 adults, Margaret, Officer Bradley, Dr. Chun, and surprisingly, Rex, entered in careful sequence. Emma sat exactly where she'd been positioned for the past 3 sessions, her small frame dwarfed by the oversized therapy chair, her enormous brown eyes immediately locking on to the unexpected presence of the large dog. For the first time in 5 days, something shifted in Emma's expression. Rex stopped immediately upon seeing Emma, his training kicking in as he assessed her emotional state. The dog could sense fear, certainly, but also something else, a desperate longing for connection that warred with overwhelming terror. Without any command from Bradley, Rex lowered himself to the floor in a perfect downstay position, making himself appear as non-threatening as possible. The room fell into absolute silence, except for the gentle hum of the heating system, and Emma's slightly accelerated breathing. Margaret clutched her purse tightly. Dr. Chun held her breath, and Officer Bradley remained motionless, allowing Rex to work his intuitive magic. Minutes passed. Emma's gaze never left Rex, and the dog maintained perfect stillness, communicating through body language that he posed no threat. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Emma's rigid posture began to relax. Her death grip on the chair arms loosened slightly, and her breathing became marginally more regular. Rex, sensing the subtle change, made the smallest possible movement. He blinked slowly and deliberately, a canine gesture that experts recognize as a peace offering. In the animal world, sustained direct eye contact can be interpreted as aggressive, but slow blinking communicates gentleness and trustworthiness. Emma blinked back. It was such a tiny interaction that the adults almost missed it, but Dr. Chun felt her heart skip a beat. This was the first reciprocal communication Emma had initiated since the trauma. She was responding to Rex on a primal, instinctual level that bypassed the cognitive barriers her fear had created. After 20 minutes of silent communication, Rex made his next move. Still maintaining his down position, he slowly stretched one paw forward, extending it about 6 inches closer to Emma's chair. It was a gesture that said, "I'm here if you need me, but I won't come any closer without permission." Emma stared at the extended paw for a long time. Then, in a movement so gradual it seemed to take forever, she leaned forward slightly in her chair. She didn't reach out, didn't speak, but her body language had shifted from pure defensive posture to cautious curiosity. Dr. Chun exchanged glances with Officer Bradley, both recognizing the significance of what they were witnessing. Emma was engaging, not with words, not even with clear gestures, but with the subtle language of trauma recovery that both professionals had learned to recognize. As the hour-long session continued, Emma made several microscopic advances. She uncrossed her arms. She shifted positions in her chair. Most remarkably, she maintained steady eye contact with Rex, studying his face with an intensity that suggested she was searching for something, perhaps trying to determine whether this large, gentle creature could be trusted in a world that had suddenly become unsafe. Near the end of the session, something extraordinary happened. Emma slowly extended one tiny finger, pointing directly at Rex. She didn't speak, didn't move from her chair, but that single gesture represented a monumental breakthrough. She was acknowledging Rex's presence, perhaps even expressing interest in interaction. Rex's tail moved once, just once, in the faintest wag of acknowledgement. When the session ended, Emma allowed Margaret to help her from the chair without the usual resistance. As they prepared to leave, Emma did something that made every adult in the room freeze. She turned back toward Rex and made direct eye contact one final time, holding his gaze for several seconds before Margaret led her away. Same time Monday. "Morning?" Dr. Chun asked Officer Bradley, her voice carefully neutral despite the hope blooming in her chest. "We'll be here," Bradley replied, watching Rex continue to stare at the door through which Emma had disappeared. Rex knows she needs him now. He won't let her down. But Monday's session would need to produce more than silent communication. In just 3 days, Emma would need to find her voice, or Robert Morrison would walk free. The preliminary hearing loomed like a storm cloud on the horizon, and time was running out faster than any of them wanted to acknowledge. Saturday morning arrived gray and overcast, matching the somber mood at the Children's Advocacy Center, where Dr. Sarah Chun paced nervously in her office. The preliminary hearing was now just 2 days away, and while Emma's response to Rex the previous afternoon had been encouraging, pointing at a dog was vastly different from providing verbal testimony that could convict her father. The legal system required words, specific details, coherent statements that a 3-year-old trauma victim might never be able to provide. District Attorney Michelle Rodriguez had called twice that morning, her voice growing more strained with each conversation. "Sarah, I need to know if this child will be able to testify," she'd said during the second call. Robert Morrison's defense attorney is already arguing that holding his client without bail based on the testimony of a mute toddler constitutes a violation of due process. If Emma can't speak by Monday morning, Judge Williams might have no choice but to grant bail. The implications were terrifying. Robert Morrison walking free meant he could potentially finish what he'd started with Lisa, who was still recovering in the hospital. It also meant Emma would live in constant fear that her father might return. Dr. Chun had seen too many cases where domestic violence escalated after failed prosecutions, often with fatal results. When Officer Bradley arrived with Rex for their second session, the dog seemed different, more focused, almost purposeful in his movements. Dr. Chun noticed that Rex went directly to the therapy room door and sat in a perfect heel position, his intelligent eyes fixed on the entrance as if he were waiting for someone specific. "He's been restless since yesterday," Bradley explained, noting Dr. Chun's observation. "Dogs have long memories, especially when they form connections with trauma victims. Rex knows Emma needs him, and he's ready to work." Emma arrived 15 minutes later, walking slightly closer to Margaret than she had the day before, but still maintaining the hypervigilant posture that had characterized her behavior since the attack. However, when she saw Rex waiting in the hallway, something remarkable happened. She stopped walking and stared at him with an expression that could only be described as recognition. Not just acknowledgement, but genuine recognition, as if she were seeing an old friend after a long absence. Rex's tail wagged once, a controlled, measured response that somehow conveyed both greeting and reassurance. For the first time since the tragedy, the corners of Emma's mouth twitched upward in what might have been the beginning of a smile. The second session progressed more quickly than anyone had dared hope. Within 10 minutes, Emma had left her defensive position in the corner chair and moved to a seat closer to where Rex lay on the carpeted floor. She wasn't close enough to touch him yet, but the physical distance between them had decreased significantly. Dr. Chun introduced simple activities designed to encourage interaction without pressure. She placed colorful building blocks on the floor near Rex, not asking Emma to play, but simply making the option available. To everyone's amazement, after watching for nearly 20 minutes, Emma slowly slid from her chair and approached the blocks. What happened next defied every expectation Dr. Chun had developed during her 2 decades working with traumatized children. Emma began building a small tower of blocks directly next to Rex, close enough that her tiny hand occasionally brushed against his fur as she worked. The dog remained perfectly still, allowing the child to dictate the pace and nature of their interaction. As Emma built, she began making soft sounds, not words yet, but gentle humming noises that suggested she was talking to herself, or perhaps to Rex. Dr. Chun strained to hear, catching fragments that sounded almost like conversation. ... blue one next ... careful ... there ... The breakthrough came during their third session on Sunday afternoon, just 18 hours before the preliminary hearing. Emma had grown comfortable enough with Rex to sit directly beside him, her small body leaning against his warm fur as she arranged blocks in increasingly complex patterns. Margaret watched from the observation room with tears streaming down her face, seeing glimpses of her real granddaughter emerging from the shell of trauma. Rex, with the intuitive intelligence that made him extraordinary at his work, began responding to Emma's proximity by making gentle dog sounds, not barking or whining, but soft rumbles and sighs that seemed to encourage her vocalization. It was as if he were teaching her, through example, that making sounds was safe. Then, so quietly that Dr. Chun almost missed it, Emma whispered something directly into Rex's ear. The words were inaudible to the humans in the room, but the dog's ears perked up as if he'd heard and understood perfectly. Emma pulled back from Rex's ear and looked directly into his brown eyes, waiting for some kind of response. Rex, in a move that no training manual could have taught him, gently licked Emma's cheek once. It was the most tender, careful gesture imaginable, and Emma's reaction was immediate and profound. She giggled. The sound was rusty from disuse and barely audible, but it was unmistakably laughter. "She's talking to him," Margaret whispered through the observation room's intercom, her voice filled with wonder. "She's actually talking to Rex." Dr. Chun nodded, recognizing the significance of what they were witnessing. Emma had found a safe recipient for her voice, someone who wouldn't judge, question, or demand explanations she wasn't ready to give. Rex had become her bridge back to communication, her pathway from silence to speech. During the remainder of Sunday's session, Emma whispered continuously to Rex, her confidence growing with each interaction. While the adults couldn't hear her words, her body language spoke volumes. She was animated for the first time since the attack, using hand gestures and facial expressions that had been completely absent during her week of silence. As the session ended, Dr. Chun made a decision that would prove crucial for the next day's hearing. "Emma," she said gently, "tomorrow Rex and I would like to visit you at a different place. It's a big room where some grown-ups need to hear the important things. You've been telling Rex. Would you like to bring Rex with you to help you talk to them?" Emma looked at Rex, then at Dr. Chun, then back at Rex. For a long moment, she seemed to be weighing something important in her young mind. Finally, she nodded once, the first clear response she'd given to any adult since the attack. Officer Bradley squeezed Dr. Chun's shoulder as they watched Emma and Margaret leave. "She's ready," he said quietly. "Rex has given her back her voice. Now we just have to hope she's brave enough to use it when it matters most." The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. the next morning. In less than 15 hours, Emma Morrison would face the most important test of her young life, with only a German shepherd named Rex standing between her and the silence that could set her father free. Monday morning dawned crisp and clear in Denver, but inside the Jefferson County Courthouse, tension hung in the air like electricity before a storm. Judge Patricia Williams had been presiding over family court for 18 years, but she'd never faced a situation quite like this. A 3-year-old child who had been mute for a week was about to testify in a case that could determine whether an alleged attempted murderer would walk free or remain behind bars pending trial. The courtroom had been transformed overnight to accommodate Emma's special needs. Child advocates had worked with court personnel to install colorful privacy screens around the witness area, creating a safe space where Emma could testify without having to see her father directly. Soft lighting replaced the harsh fluorescence typically used in legal proceedings, and a small chair had been brought in to replace the intimidating witness stand that would have dwarfed the tiny girl. By 8:30 a.m., the gallery was packed with an unusual mix of spectators. Court reporters, legal scholars, and child welfare advocates filled the benches, alongside family members and law enforcement personnel who had worked on the case. Word had spread throughout the Denver legal community about the unprecedented situation, a police dog being allowed to provide emotional support during testimony in a felony proceeding. District Attorney Michelle Rodriguez sat at the prosecution table, reviewing her notes one final time while trying to mask her anxiety. She'd built her career on high-profile cases, but never had so much depended on the words of someone who might not be able to speak at all. Across the aisle, Robert Morrison's defense attorney, James Crawford, shuffled through papers with barely concealed satisfaction. Crawford had built his reputation on getting charges dismissed due to procedural issues and inadequate evidence, and he clearly believed this case would add another victory to his record. Robert Morrison himself sat in the defendant's chair, wearing an orange jail jumpsuit and leg shackles, Even restrained, he cut an intimidating figure, 6 feet 4 inches of barely contained rage. His cold blue eyes constantly scanned the courtroom, and when they settled on the area where his daughter would soon testify, his expression hardened into something that made several observers shift uncomfortably in their seats. At 8:45 a.m., Officer Tom Bradley entered through the courthouse's side entrance with Rex at his side. The German shepherd moved with calm professionalism, but Bradley could sense the dog's heightened awareness. Rex understood that today was different, that the stakes were higher than any of their previous victim assistance calls. The K-9's training had prepared him for courtroom environments, but supporting a traumatized toddler in such a formal, intimidating setting would test every aspect of his specialized skills. Dr. Sarah Chun met them in the hallway outside courtroom 3B, her usually composed demeanor showing cracks of nervous energy. Emma arrived 10 minutes ago with Margaret, she reported. Quietly, she's been asking for Rex since they got here. She keeps saying, "Where's my helper dog?" It's the most she's spoken to any adult since the attack. The phrase "my helper dog" sent a surge of both hope and pressure through Bradley's chest. Emma had claimed Rex as her own, which meant the dog's presence wasn't just comforting, it was essential. If Rex couldn't provide the security Emma needed to testify, the case against Robert Morrison would likely collapse before noon. Margaret Walsh appeared in the hallway, holding Emma's small hand as they approached the courtroom doors. Emma was dressed in the same yellow sunflower dress she'd worn during her breakthrough session with Rex, but her grandmother had added a small sunflower barrette to her blonde hair, a touch of brightness in what promised to be a dark day. The moment Emma saw Rex, her entire demeanor changed. Her shoulders relaxed, her grip on Margaret's hand loosened, and for the first time that morning, she smiled. "Rex," she said clearly, her voice carrying down the hallway. It was the first time she'd spoken his name aloud in front of adults, and the simple word carried profound significance for everyone who heard it. Rex's tail wagged once in acknowledgement, but his professional training kept him calm and focused. He approached Emma slowly, allowing her to reach out and touch his head before sitting quietly beside her. The connection between them was immediately visible. Emma's breathing became more regular, her posture straightened, and the fearful expression that had haunted her face for days began to fade. Judge Williams called the courtroom to order. At exactly 9 a.m., her voice carrying the authority of years on the bench, but tempered with unusual gentleness given the circumstances. "This court is convened for the preliminary hearing in the matter of the People versus Robert Morrison," she announced. "Before we proceed, I want to address the extraordinary circumstances of today's proceedings." The judge's eyes found Emma in the gallery, sitting between Margaret and Officer Bradley, with Rex lying quietly at her feet. "This court recognizes that we are asking a great deal of a very young witness today. The presence of the therapy dog has been approved after careful consideration of the child's best interests and the requirements of due process." Defense Attorney Crawford immediately stood to object. "Your Honor, my client's right to a fair hearing is being compromised by this theatrical display. The presence of a police dog creates an atmosphere of intimidation and prejudice against my client before any testimony has been heard." Judge Williams's response was swift and firm. "Mr. Crawford, this court has reviewed extensive psychological evaluations and expert testimony regarding the necessity of emotional support for this witness. Your objection is noted and overruled. The dog will remain." Emma watched this exchange with wide eyes, not fully understanding the legal maneuvering, but clearly sensing the tension in the room. Rex seemed to sense her growing anxiety and shifted slightly closer to her chair, his warm presence providing immediate reassurance. District Attorney Rodriguez called Emma Morrison as her first witness. The courtroom fell into absolute silence as Margaret helped Emma stand and walk toward the modified witness area. Every step seemed to take forever, and with each movement, the weight of the moment pressed down on everyone present. Emma climbed into the small chair that had been positioned for her testimony, her legs dangling several inches from the floor. Rex positioned himself directly beside her, close enough that she could reach out and touch him whenever she needed reassurance. The privacy screens shielded her from direct sight of her father, but everyone in the courtroom could feel Robert Morrison's presence like a malevolent shadow. Judge Williams leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle but clear. "Emma, do you understand that you're here to tell us about something that happened at your house?" Emma looked at Rex, then at the judge, then back at Rex. After a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, she nodded once. "Can you tell us what happened that night when your mommy got hurt?" Emma's small hand found Rex's head, her fingers tangling in his thick fur as she prepared to speak, the words that would either bring justice for her mother or set her father free. The entire courtroom held its breath, waiting for a 3-year-old's testimony to determine the fate of a man who had nearly committed murder. The moment of truth had finally arrived. The silence in courtroom 3B was so profound that the soft hum of the ventilation system seemed thunderous. Every eye in the packed gallery was fixed on the tiny figure of Emma Morrison, sitting in her modified witness chair with her small hand resting on Rex's head. The German shepherd remained perfectly still, his brown eyes alert and focused on his young charge, ready to provide whatever support she needed for what would be the most important testimony of her short life. District Attorney Michelle Rodriguez approached the witness area with deliberate care, her years of experience with child witnesses guiding every movement. She knelt slightly to bring herself closer to Emma's eye level, her voice soft but clear enough for the court reporter to capture every word. "Emma, sweetheart, can you tell us your full name?" Rodriguez began with the simplest possible question, establishing the foundation for testimony that could change everything. Emma's fingers tightened slightly in Rex's fur, and she glanced at the dog before looking back at the prosecutor. "Emma Louise Morrison," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but perfectly audible in the silent courtroom. It was the first complete sentence she had spoken to an adult since the night of the attack. Judge Williams leaned forward slightly, her expression carefully neutral, despite the significance of hearing Emma's voice. The court reporter's fingers moved rapidly across her stenotype machine, capturing these precious words for the permanent record. "And do you live in a house with your mommy?" Rodriguez continued, building Emma's confidence with questions she could answer easily. "Yes," Emma replied, her voice growing slightly stronger. Rex shifted almost imperceptibly, somehow sensing that his young partner was finding her courage. "Emma, I want you to think about a night when there were very loud noises in your house, and your mommy got hurt. Do you remember that night?" The change in Emma's demeanor was immediate and heartbreaking. Her small body tensed, her breathing became shallow, and her free hand clenched into a tiny fist. But instead of retreating into silence as she had done for the past week, she turned to Rex and whispered something directly into his ear, so quietly that no one else could hear. Rex's response was immediate and perfect. He gently nuzzled Emma's cheek and positioned himself even closer to her chair, creating a protective barrier between the traumatized child and the overwhelming adult world that surrounded her. The dog's presence seemed to infuse Emma with strength she didn't know she possessed. "Yes," Emma said finally, her voice steady despite the tears that had begun to form in her eyes. "I remember." Rodriguez felt her heart racing as she prepared for the crucial questions that would determine Robert Morrison's fate. She could sense the defense attorney tensing behind her, ready to object at the slightest provocation, while the packed gallery held its collective breath. "Emma, can you tell us what you heard that night?" Emma's small voice began to paint her of terror that no child should ever experience. "I heard crashing sounds," she said, her words becoming clearer as she spoke, like when I dropped my toys, but much louder. And Mommy was making scared noises. What kind of scared noises? Rodriguez asked gently, knowing she was walking a delicate line between gathering necessary evidence and traumatizing the child further. Crying, Emma replied, unconsciously mimicking the sound, and yelling no, no really loud. It was scary, so I hid it in my closet. The prosecutor could feel the jury of public opinion in the gallery shifting, their hearts breaking for this brave little girl who was reliving her worst nightmare. But she needed more specific testimony to ensure. Robert Morrison couldn't walk free. Emma, did you see who was making the loud crashing sounds? This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the question that could make or break the case. Emma looked directly at Rex, seeking strength from her four-legged guardian angel. The dog seemed to understand the gravity of the moment, his intelligent eyes never leaving Emma's face as he provided the silent support she desperately needed. "The bad man?" Emma said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "The really big bad man who lives in our house sometimes? Can you tell us who the bad man is, Emma?" The courtroom was so quiet that every person present could hear their own heartbeat. This was the moment that would determine whether justice would be served or whether a violent criminal would walk free to potentially hurt Emma and her mother again. Emma turned toward the privacy screens that had been erected to protect her from seeing her father directly. Even though she couldn't see Robert Morrison, she seemed to sense his presence in the courtroom. Her small body began to tremble, and, for a terrifying moment, it appeared she might retreat back into the silence that had protected her for the past week. But Rex was there, steady and strong and safe. Emma buried her face in the dog's thick fur for several seconds, drawing courage from his unwavering presence. When she lifted her head, her tear-filled eyes blazed with a determination that shocked every adult in the room. "He hurt Mommy really bad," Emma said, her voice clear and strong despite her tears. "He used his hands to hit her, and there was blood everywhere, and Mommy fell down and wouldn't wake up." The gallery was completely frozen, hanging on every word from this impossibly brave little girl. District Attorney Rodriguez knew she was approaching the most crucial moment of the entire proceeding, the testimony that would either convict Robert Morrison or set him free. "Emma, do you know the name of the bad man who hurt your mommy?" Emma looked at Rex one final time, seeking the last bit of courage she would need to speak the truth that could save her mother's life and her own future. The German shepherd seemed to nod almost imperceptibly, giving her permission to be brave. In the profound silence that followed, Emma leaned slightly toward Rex, placed her small hand on his head, and spoke two words that would echo through that courtroom forever. Two words that carried the weight of justice and the power of truth. Two words that would shatter the silence that had protected a monster for too long. Daddy hurt. The simple, devastating statement hung in the air like a physical presence. Every person in courtroom 3B, the judge, the attorneys, the court personnel, the packed gallery, even the hardened court reporter, sat completely frozen, the terrible truth finally spoken aloud by the only witness who could deliver it. Emma Morrison, 3 years old, had found her voice at last, and with just 2 words, she had changed everything. The 2 words "Daddy hurt" seemed to reverberate through courtroom 3B, long after Emma had spoken them, hanging in the air like an indictment that no defense attorney could challenge. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft sound of someone crying in the gallery, Margaret Walsh, tears streaming down her face as she witnessed her granddaughter's incredible courage in speaking the truth that had been locked inside her for a week. Judge Patricia Williams was the first to break the spell that had frozen the courtroom. Her voice, usually stern and authoritative, carried a gentleness that reflected the extraordinary nature of what had just occurred. "Thank you, Emma," she said softly. You've been very brave today." Emma looked up at the judge, then down at Rex, her small hand still resting in the dog's fur. "Rex helped me," she said clearly, her voice stronger now that the most difficult words had been spoken. "He made me not scared anymore." Defense attorney James Crawford attempted one final desperate objection. "Your Honor, this testimony is clearly the result of coaching and manipulation of a traumatized child who—" "Mr. Crawford," Judge Williams interrupted, her tone cutting through his words like steel. "This court has just witnessed the most authentic and compelling testimony I've encountered in 18 years on the bench. Your objection is noted and overruled." The preliminary hearing concluded within the hour. Based on Emma's testimony and the overwhelming physical evidence, Judge Williams ruled that probable cause existed for all charges against Robert Morrison, including attempted murder, aggravated assault, and child endangerment. Morrison would remain in custody without bail pending trial, and a permanent restraining order was immediately issued protecting both Emma and Lessa Morrison. As court personnel led Robert Morrison away in shackles, he turned back toward the witness area where his daughter sat with Rex. For one terrifying moment, his cold blue eyes locked with Emma's, and she instinctively pressed closer to the German shepherd. But instead of fear, something new flickered in Emma's expression. A recognition that the man who had terrorized her family was powerless now, that justice was finally being served. 3 months later, the formal trial resulted in Robert Morrison's conviction on all charges. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts that would send him to prison for 25 years to life. Emma didn't have to testify again. Her preliminary hearing testimony, preserved in court transcripts, was sufficient to convince 12 adults that justice demanded the maximum penalty. But the real victory wasn't measured in years of imprisonment or legal precedents. The real victory was evident in the little girl who visited the Denver Police Department's K-9 unit every Saturday morning, bringing homemade cookies for the officers and dog treats for Rex. Emma Morrison, now 4 years old and attending preschool, bore little resemblance to the silent, terrified child who had been found hiding in a closet that terrible February night. "She's completely transformed," Dr. Sarah Chon reported during a follow-up evaluation 6 months after the trial. "Emma shows no signs of selective mutism. Her nightmares have completely stopped, and she's testing above grade level in early childhood development assessments." The bond with Rex didn't just help her testify. It fundamentally changed her relationship with trust and safety. Lessa Morrison had made a remarkable recovery as well, though she would never fully remember the night of the attack due to her traumatic brain injury. She had regained her speech, mobility, and most importantly, her role as Emma's mother. The two had moved to a small apartment across town, far from the house where their nightmare had occurred, and were building a new life together with the support of victim services and an extended network of advocates who had rallied around their case. Officer Tom Bradley often reflected on how Rex's work with Emma had changed both the dog and the handler. Rex had always been exceptional at victim services, but his success with Emma had elevated him to legendary status within the Denver Police Department. Requests came in weekly from other jurisdictions wanting to learn about Rex's specialized training and therapeutic techniques. "What people don't understand," Bradley explained to a reporter writing a feature story about the case, "is that Rex didn't save Emma. Emma saved herself. Rex just provided the safe space where she could find her own courage." On a sunny Saturday morning in October, nearly 8 months after that frozen moment in the courtroom, Emma arrived at the police station carrying a special gift. She had spent weeks working on it with her preschool art teacher, a large drawing showing herself and Rex as superheroes, complete with capes and masks, standing triumphantly over a defeated villain. "This is us being brave together," Emma explained to the gathered officers, her voice clear and confident as she presented the artwork to Officer Bradley. Rex taught me that being scared is okay, but being brave is better. The drawing was professionally framed and hung in the K9 Unit's main office, where it served as a daily reminder of the profound impact their work could have. Below the artwork, a small plaque read, "In honor of Emma Morrison and Canine Rex," proving that sometimes the most powerful testimonies come from the smallest voices, and that healing happens when we least expect it. Rex, now retired from active police work and serving full-time in victim services, had become something of a celebrity in child psychology circles. His techniques with Emma had been studied and replicated, leading to the development of new protocols for using therapy animals with traumatized children. But for Rex himself, none of the accolades mattered as much as those Saturday morning visits from a little girl who called him my hero dog. Emma had started kindergarten that fall, excelling in reading and making friends easily. Her teacher reported that she was particularly kind to children who seemed scared or lonely, often inviting them to play and share her toys. When asked why, she was so nice to other kids, Emma's response was simple: "Because Rex taught me that when someone is scared, you just have to be really gentle and patient, and eventually they'll be brave again." The case of Emma Morrison versus her father's silence had become more than just a legal victory. It had become a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the healing power of the human-animal bond, and the extraordinary courage that could emerge from the most unlikely heroes. 2 words, Daddy Hurt, had frozen a courtroom, convicted a monster, and freed a little girl to reclaim her voice. But more importantly, they had proven that justice could prevail when courage found its voice, no matter how small that voice might be. In the end, Emma Morrison and Rex had taught an entire community that sometimes the most profound truths come wrapped in the simplest words, spoken by the bravest hearts.